Well, thank you everybody for being here today. I didn't know if we'd have a good crowd or not because it's Labor Day weekend and a lot of people weren't home yesterday, so we left a lot of messages on answering machines and things. So we're excited to have Jane Nickerson and her husband here today with us. They live in Aberdeen, and they've been, it seems, all over the continental North American plane, from Canada to Aberdeen to several states, and she has done all sorts of publishing, whether it be from, was it Harper?
Highlights.
From Highlights magazine.
Lots of children's magazines.
Self-publishing, and then the big publisher was
It's Knopf, which is an imprint of Random House.
Knopf, which is Random House. So we've got a largely published author here with us today of all sorts. So we're excited to have her and her husband. And I'll let her talk about her because I'm not going to tell those details exactly right. So thank you.
It is a pleasure to be here, and it's so good to see that y'all are keeping the literary fires burning in Fulton, Mississippi. I have kind of a soft voice, and I also have a cold. Can you hear me okay? I'm doing the best I can with this voice of mine. Here we have a pretty door, and I have always liked doors, especially portals into other worlds, like the door in the wardrobe in Narnia. And when I was little, and the squiggles on the pages first turned into letters and then into words and sentences and pictures in my imagination, it was as if a door had opened for me. And when authors write books, we want to open a secret door into other worlds for readers. And when we read books, we want to enter that door. When you read my books, my published books so far anyway, you walk through a door into the 1860s, since that's when my books take place. Now there is a store in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard called the Time Travel Mart. And in the back of it, they hold writing classes for kids. But in the front, it has a shop where people can buy items to help them step back in time, in their imaginations anyway. They have things like bottles containing barbarian repellent. They have an emergency mummy wrapping kit. They have bottles that contain dead languages. The motto of the store is, whenever you are, we're already then. And when you leave the store, the sign says, come back yesterday. The store's purpose, like writers, is to help people suspend their disbelief. Now, I have always been very good at suspending my disbelief. I believed in fairies when I was little, till I was actually embarrassingly old. And I was able to have two minds, because I knew that fairies didn't actually exist, but I also knew that they did. And I even tried to gather up proof to show my siblings about fairies existing. I'd put out little bits of food, and then I made sure it disappeared. And I wrote some letters by scratching words onto rose leaves, and I claimed they were from fairies, all to prove to my siblings of the existence of fairies. And I knew it was me doing it, but I also knew it was the fairies doing it. So I guess I was kind of a crazy little kid. Now, here is another door. It is 221B. Anybody recognize that? 221B Baker Street?
Sherlock Holmes.
That's right. It is the fictional address of Sherlock Holmes in London. And Sherlock Holmes, of course, is a fictional character, and there isn't actually a real 221B Baker Street. That some enterprising person just put up this doorway there in London, but they get thousands and thousands of visitors every year to get their picture taken by 221B Baker Street. So the suspension of disbelief is the thing that causes those visitors to go there, or to the Green Gables house, as in Anne of Green Gables on Prince Edward Island in Canada, or other fictional places. And it's why I would love to go to New Zealand, because that's where the Lord of the Rings movies were filmed and the Narnia movies. So I can kind of believe in Narnia or Hobbiton. And since this ability to believe and to know two different ways is what an author wants to help readers achieve, I have a question for y'all. When you are reading, can you actually picture in your mind the scene that you're reading? Do you picture what the house looks like and what the characters look like? Well, because it's my theory that children that don't enjoy reading can't do that. They can't turn those words into pictures in their minds. And so the authors painting the best pictures are able to help the readers do that the very best. Now, Pablo Picasso wrote this. He wrote, "We all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize the truth that is given us to understand. The artist must know the manner whereby to convince others of the truthfulness of his lies." And the word lie is kind of a harsh word, I know, and it's kind of tangled and confusing, but you know what he means. Now, I have a sister-in-law who didn't let her children read fictional books because she saw them as lies. And she wouldn't let them watch A Little Mermaid because what she said is that it would teach them to believe that all boys wanted to do was kiss girls. Which, maybe they enjoy kissing girls, but there's a lot more to it than that. She just didn't understand that people have the amazing ability to believe and not believe at the same time. It's not going to change her children because of reading fictional books or watching movies like Little Mermaid. And fiction isn't really lies because there's a truth in it. At least there is if it's good fiction. We want readers to know that our characters may not be real, but to still have real feelings about them. I have always been a little bit homesick for the olden days. I know, what were you saying that you said that there's a time period that you wish you had been lived in.
Oh, in the 60s and the 70s. But I was like, I know what that door is.
Is that which door is it? Is it
Hobbit door?
Is it Hobbit door? Well, anyway, I've always been homesick for the 1800s. And I love their houses and their clothes and their morals and their manners. And one of the reasons I love our part of Mississippi is all the beautiful old things there are around here. And when I was writing my 3 books set in the 1800s Mississippi, and my books are, the 3 that are published so far anyway, are Strands of Bronze and Gold, The Mirk and Midnight Hour, and A Place of Stone and Shadow, I just reveled in researching everything. I didn't want to assume anything about that period, and so I studied the fashions, and I looked up things like when zippers were invented. They were invented in 1893, but they didn't catch on till 1917. And for Strands and Mirk, I studied slave laws. For Mirk, I researched the Civil War and voodoo. And for Place, I studied girls' school and teenage slang of 1867, although the word and concept of teenager didn't come into use until the 1920s. Did any of you know that? There was no such thing as a teenager before the 1920s. And I was so caught up in the research that it was hard to make myself finally start writing, because I just would keep researching more and more and more stuff. I wanted everything to be absolutely authentic, so readers would really feel as if they'd walked through that secret door and have been transported to another world. And my publishers also were really into making things be totally authentic. And they would catch me on a few things. And so hopefully the words and the phrases, the dialogue in my books are all authentic to that time period. Now, Strands of Bronze and Gold takes place in 1857, and it is a retelling of the fairy tale of Bluebeard, which is not to be confused with the pirate Blackbeard. A lot of people get them confused. But Bluebeard is where an innocent young girl goes to live with her mysterious guardian, and in my book, his name, Monsieur Bernard de Cressac, in his home, Wind-Riven Abbey, and she uncovers the fact that he has murdered his wives. The Mirk and Midnight Hour takes place in 1862 during the Civil War, and is a retelling of the Ballad of Tam Lin. And I used voodoo practitioners taking the place of the fairies, which are in the original Ballad of Tam Lin. And my 3rd book, which this is my daughter Stella in her Victorian mourning clothes. My 3rd book, A Place of Stone and Shadow, it debuted a year ago, February, and it's not a retelling, it's an original ghost story that takes place in Wind-Riven Abbey, the same setting as Strand's, in 1867. I wrote it mainly because my mother wanted more of the Abbey, and she wanted more Monsieur Bernard, and she loves ghost stories, and so she wanted me to write that. Now, Wind-Driven Abbey was a medieval manor house in England that was brought over and rebuilt stone by stone in Mississippi. Generations lived and died in the house, and some of them do not. Rest easy. After the war, Wind-Driven was turned into a girls' boarding school. This is our heroine, Fiona O'Malley. She's a tall, gawky 16-year-old who has never been good at making friends and who writes poetry and who sees ghosts. She's wealthy and has always lived with her grandmother in New York City until she hears a speaker tell of Wind-Driven Academy. And I'm going to read you a few excerpts from Place of Stone and Shadow. I had stood frozen, hearing a siren's call to go to Wind-Driven to help these people. Grandmama at first had been adamant that I should ignore the siren. Why do you think you'd be happy there when you've plagued me unceasingly to remove you from the other schools you've attended? And in the backwoods of Mississippi, of all places. These days, no one from the north would send their child down there. She smartly tapped one finger on the pamphlet Mr. Stone had given me. Besides which, it's in a grim, gloomy, ancient manner. Believe me, my girl, I saw plenty of those back in the old country, assuredly riddled with rotten mildew. She shuddered. And they all had nasty ghosts, or else some dire curse. Of course, those things are a lot of superstitious twaddle, but I'm not having a granddaughter of mine exposed to them. Perhaps I'll come upon the apparition of a walled-in nun, I said, since it used to be a convent. One can hope anyway. I couldn't resist. Grandmama had that effect on me. She rolled her eyes, made the sign of the cross, and began fanning herself feverishly. I had never told Grandmama of my own experiences with particularly nasty ghosts right there in her own home, or of any of the other spooks I saw now and again. I had never made the mistake of blurting that out, although, come to think of it, it was an Irish peasant legacy I had no doubt inherited through her. When her grandmother finally agrees to let her go, Fiona wonders why. I supposed it was in the hopes that the academy would transform the sowsier that was me into a silk purse. Perhaps my grandmother also was worried about what I would become if I continued in my solitary ways. Little did Grandmama know, I sometimes had a similar nagging fear. I was fretted by the frightening picture of the wild-eyed, poetry-scribbling, spectre-seeing recluse I might become if my lonely life remained undisturbed. Perhaps the siren's call was simply my excuse to make another foray into the world. Let's see. Fiona travels to Mississippi and takes up residence at Wind-Driven Academy. Because of her psychic abilities, from the moment she enters Wind-Driven, she can feel the past closing around her like water over pebbles. So many lives and so many deaths. Since Fiona is a poet, some of her poems are interspersed throughout the book. She wrote this one soon after arriving at Wind-Driven. They come out from the corners and the in-betweens, those shuddering like mourners and those seldom seen. They crawl out of the mirrors and hang above the beds, those loveless and those dearer, those pale and past, those dead. Fiona attends classes, and at first she feels as awkward as ever. She overhears some girls saying mean things about her, and that night, in her room, I lay against my pillows, trying to become used to the strange shadows and the strange sounds and the strange feel of this place. The things the girls had said slithered again into my mind. I winced and drew my knees to my chest. It seemed to me, as a person who had experienced a great deal of exquisite social embarrassment in her 16 years, that humiliation can be worse in some aspects than tragedy. At least there's dignity in tragedy, but in embarrassment there is only gut-wrenching pain and the cringing hope that no one else will learn of it. I sucked in my breath so it felt as if I were choking. I'd always known I was odd and unattractive. Early on, the two had made sure of that. Whoops. But somehow I had hoped no one here would notice. I reached for my handkerchief on the bedside table and turned my pillow over so the feathers would fluff and the linen would be cooler against my neck as I prepared for a good cry. My sniffing drew in a whiff of pipe tobacco with an underlining scent of something spicy masculine, as of a gentleman's cologne. A sound met my ears, footsteps pacing the floor above. I didn't like to think of so many strangers so close, but then again, I didn't like to think of the empty rooms either. Or no, not upstairs. I gave a short gasp. The footfall was right here in this room, around my bed. I clutched at the covers. Now the quiet tread moved toward the window. I forced myself to look. The draperies were open. Bars of moonlight sliced through the hazy silhouette of a broad-shouldered person standing with his back to me, gazing out into the darkness. Of course, my room is haunted. Now, this particular ghost that she saw there turns out to be Leo, an attractive young man from the 1700s. Of course, Fiona falls for him, even though she knows it's a weird situation and that it's her duty to help him find his way to heaven. Fiona does make some friends besides Leo, the nice ghost. She's befriended by other girls, by a handsome East Indian student from the nearby Boys Academy, and also by the charming estate manager. But there is another presence in Wind Riven that is much less pleasant. Fiona's maid, Bridie, who had seen the evil apparition, falls down the cellar steps to her death. Items go missing, and girls hear strange sounds and feel as if they're being watched. Fiona finds herself tested as the deeper secrets and mysteries of Wind Riven surround her. Will she be able to help those who truly need her? What will become of their lives and their souls if she's unable to overpower the mysterious evil that refuses to die? A Place of Stone and Shadow is part supernatural tale, part murder mystery, and part romance. One critic says it is lushly wrought, haunting, and layered. So if you are to read any of my books, I hope you will be transported through a fascinating door. And now, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer. I can answer them about my books. I can answer them about the process of being published if you're interested in that. Whatever you're interested in.
I just want to hear more.
So,
Ted will ask a question.
yeah, so
What question will
I
you
think
ask?
it's often interesting to, I always sit through these and listen to everybody else's questions, but what's also often interesting to people is how you think these three books are different.
Now, what do you mean how they're different?
You know, you start, what kind of story, Strands, Bronze Ghosts don't have ghosts or anything like
Oh,
that.
no, the only ghosts are in Place of
Yeah.
Stone and Shadow.
That's the ghost story.
Strands is more, it's kind of a murder mystery, and it's also my heroine, Sophia. At first she's totally charmed by Monsieur Bernard, the guy who eventually she learns has killed his wives. And you can see how the pattern of abuse starts in relationships. And I studied, of course, abusive relationships because that's what he is, because he is charming and wonderful right at first. And then gradually you see how he pulls her in and how helpless she is. She's a young girl, she's all by herself, she has no money or no place to go besides there, and how he kind of fools her and then gains control over her. And it's weird when I'm writing, I don't always know exactly the story I'm going to write, you know, even though it was based on the Bluebeard fairy tale, so I know there had to be the murdered wives in it. I didn't realize that it would have that
The
abusive.
characters gotta tell you.
Yeah, they do.
And what's the
absolutely.
name of this book you're talking about?
That one is Strands of Bronze and Gold, which is,
You might have missed it. These three novels, one of them happens just before the war between the states, the
That's
other one
this
during, and the other just after.
yeah, this
They're kind of,
was the one that takes place in 1857 in small town Mississippi. And then the Mirk and Midnight Hour is the one that takes place during the Civil War, and it's the one where she gets entangled with the voodoo practitioners.
But the real plot of Tam Lin is,
Oh yeah, she has to rescue. In the Ballad of Tam Lin, it's a knight that was enchanted by fairies, and so the girl has to go and rescue him from the fairies. But in the Mirk and Midnight Hour, it's a Civil War soldier, a wounded Civil War soldier who has been kidnapped by the voodoo practitioners. And people always, other things people say is they say, you're such a nice person, why do you write scary stuff? And I told them that I write lots of nice stuff. You know, I've written for a lot of religious children's magazines, but these are what got published. Was my scary stuff was what got published. And you know, I've always been interested in mysteries and scary books and stuff. But I read all kinds of books. I read everything.
Did you go through an agent first? Or?
Yep, you pretty much.
Well, not originally, back in the day.
Well, back when I was doing short stories for magazines, I didn't.
Yeah.
And I tried to get children's books published without an agent back in the 1990s. But then I think I was telling you about that I have 5 kids, and I realized I was just ignoring my kids. You know, they'd be talking, say something to me, and I'd be making up dialogue in my mind. And I'd be, oh, what did you
That's
say?
how you survive.
And so I purposely quit writing until my kids all got out of school. And when I came back to writing up in Canada, that's when I wrote Strands of Bronze and Gold, and that's when I got my agent. And it amazed me, the turnaround, because an agent can send the manuscripts out to the publishers and they'll get it back within a couple weeks. Whereas if you try to send them to yourself to publishers, which I did before, it could be a year before they get back with you.
So does that mean that if you have an agent, it skips the slush pile?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, a
That's
lot
what I'm going
of
wrong.
publishers just don't even bother with their slush pile much because they make the agents do that, because the agent reads a bunch of stuff and only selects.
But it's as hard, it can be as hard to get an agent as it is to get a publisher to read your stuff. So,
That was gonna be my question, how you get it?
well, I would send queries I sent them to,
And what's a query?
a query is a letter describing your book and trying to make it sound fascinating enough to make them want to look at it. And so I sent queries to 15 different agents, and I only got responses from 3 of them. And then those 3 asked me for full manuscripts, so then I would send my full manuscript to the agents. And then I picked the one that Wendy Schmaltz was the one I picked.
Why did you pick that one?
Oh, she was the most well-known. And so I thought she would have more of an in. The other 2 were younger ones that are just starting out.
How do you find out who agents are?
Well, I had the Children's Writers and Illustrated Market book, but you can get that online also. I just still prefer books. And so you get your list of agents from there, and then you still go online and go to that agent's website, because whole lots of agents won't accept queries at that time. You know, if they've got enough people, authors they're working with, and they don't want anybody else. So that's what you do.
And you get ahead a lot by following their requirements for
Their
queries.
guidelines.
Exactly.
Their specs. And anyway, so then my agent sent it around to different publishers, and she got plenty of rejections. So you just have to go through rejections after rejections after rejections. And that's in fact, that's one of the reasons why I haven't done a whole lot of writing the last couple of years. Even though my husband keeps trying to get me to go back to it. You get kind of tired of the rejections, and you start thinking, I just don't care that much, actually. Because even after you've been published, that doesn't mean your next thing will be published.
It doesn't mean they don't call you, they don't want you to do another one then, it's not.
Well, they are more willing to look at your next
Just more
one,
willing
but
to
they don't give you
impress
any
you to-
promises. Now, if you're famous, if you're John Grisham or whatever,
Well, yeah.
even before you write it, they'll buy it.
It really depends on sales of your first book.
But, yeah.
When I was reading all this stuff on it, if your first book, usually they offer you an advance, and so you might say you get $10,000 advance. Well, then as your books sell, it goes against that advance. So you don't get royalties until you pay your advance all the way out with the books that are sold. And if you don't pay your advance out in a year, they're not much interested in trying you again. Because they don't start making money really good until then, and if they're not making money, they're looking elsewhere.
So it's just a business.
You'll be,
Basically for
Oh,
them.
and
You gotta
absolutely.
be
course it is.
reserved first.
And there's all kinds of, you know, a lot of the fun of writing goes when you're trying to please somebody else. Like with Strands of Bronze and Gold, my editor sent me a fat envelope, and then 2 pages of things that she wanted me to change right from the beginning. And there were things like, develop Sophie's character better. And I mean, that's this whole book. That's the entire book. And another one says, Monsieur Bernard is too suspicious right at first, make him less suspicious. And it's just these things that, and I remember when the big fat envelope first came, I couldn't make myself open it of the things, because I was so scared of what they were going to ask me to do. And Ted had to open it for me, and he'd look at it and say, well, it's not that bad. It's not that bad.
and the advance they offer is, they give you a little bit of money right then. Then when you have edited it to their satisfaction, you get a little bit more money, and then when it publishes out, you get
Well, and it says in the contract that if you don't edit it to their sasatisfaction, you have to give all the money back. And I'm like, what if I can't do it? You know, what if I can't do what they want? But I did. I did what they wanted.
So you don't jump in and spend that money.
Right.
Does it bother you that you have to do that, to change your original writings to their
Well,
specifications?
you
Because
know,
they just want to sell the book, not.
My editor, we were really in simpatico with each other, because the thing she said, I think, oh yeah, I noticed that, but I hope nobody else would notice it. And so the things she asked me to do, I was glad to do. But like beforehand, you're supposed to have what you call beta readers, which, like, if you're in a writer's group, they're your beta readers, the people that read it before you ever try to get an agent to submit it. And I had one of my good friends from college was one of my beta readers, and she would give me these suggestions that I think, she doesn't have a clue what I'm trying to do. And so I always warn my beta readers, you know, I may or may not take your suggestions, because I don't want to be insulting to them. But it just surprised me, because this person, I like her so much, and she's a really discerning reader, but she just didn't know what I was doing. And so anyway, I can imagine if you have an editor that you're not on the same wavelength, I would think it'd be really frustrating. Well, in some of my children's stories in magazines, like, they changed the whole story. You know, they paid me for it, which is all I care about. But then when I would read the story in the magazine, I'd say, who wrote this?
You did highlights for children?
You know, actually, I don't think I ever did do highlights. I did Humpty Dumpty and Ladybug and Cricket.
I think you did.
Did I ever do?
I think.
I did lots of different ones, so.
I mean, you submitted, back in those days, you wrote a lot of
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
and sent them a lot of places.
Do you think about self-publishing, like direct through Amazon, and then hire a freelance editor?
You know, yeah, and what do you think about that?
We actually did self-publish the last one.
Yeah, in fact, that's what places so much shadow.
Yeah.
They decided it was too religious, and also they worried about because we're in Mississippi pre-Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
there are slaves. You can't get out of the slaves, and in fact, a lot of the criticisms of my stuff was, like, one person said, I'm surprised the author chose this setting. I mean, it's actually politically incorrect to exist in Mississippi during the Civil War or before the Civil War, and I think they didn't want to get into any more of that.
That spurred the question for me about the Laura Ingalls Wilder thing.
Oh, I know.
For anybody that's unfamiliar,
It's crazy.
ALA group, which I was a member of ALA only because it got me a percentage off at a conference, but they're notoriously liberal. I'm almost ashamed to be affiliated with.
You got to censor that part.
Yeah, I will. But
I forgot about that.
yeah, maybe the watchdogs won't be looking at that. But okay, the term I think was I think that they're okay. For those that didn't know, they had an award called Laura Ingalls Wilder Award, which was a Lifetime Achievement Award, and that they gave, and they decided they wanted to take that name away because in their eyes, Laura Ingalls Wilder was reflected outdated stereotypes and this, that, and the other.
Racist, whatever.
Yeah, which one particular passage that I saw mentioned was one from the girl, I can't remember, I haven't read all of her books, but it said there were no people in the, when we got to wherever it was, the prairie, only Indians, which they didn't see people as, well, that, the
That
thing about it
was
is you
the-
can't change the past. That's the way they really looked at it. If you're going to write about the past, which you should, if you're not going to repeat certain mistakes, in my opinion, then you have to reflect.
What the past.
Well, and I
really
just
was.
struggled,
Right.
and I bent over backwards. I had good characters and bad characters of each race. You know, I did my very best, but there were still plenty of people that said, somebody called my unfortunate depiction of the black characters or something, which
But
I, yeah.
you're always going to get, Jane never could quite get over the fact that lots of people hated her book. And I said, no
Lots
matter,
loved them.
no matter what, that's what I would always tell you, no matter what you write, a lot of people hate, a lot of people, in Strands of Broad Gold, the hero is a Christian minister man. People hated that.
And
They
I
didn't think of-
purposely did that
they-
because I get so sick of books that have the Christians or the preachers be the bad guy. And so I purposely had the
Sounds
love
good to me.
interest.
Yeah, that's right.
The good guy.
Yeah,
The good
I
guy.
had the love interest and the good guy be a wonderful Christian minister named Gideon.
But people, some people hated that, and so the point, and the self-publishing question, we decided to self-publish this last one. The simplest one you could do probably is the Amazon one. I looked into a lot of them, studied different things, but the Amazon one is a little more. It's a little bit constricted in what you can and can't do.
Especially with the cover.
With the cover and with quite a few things in terms of pricing and other sorts of things. And if you want to print it, that's really not a great source. If you want an only electronic book, then Amazon is a quick way to get in there and get some stuff going. Be sure and make a good cover. You wouldn't think an electronic book would need a cover or that would matter, but it turns out, even when people look at them electronically, they believe you can tell a book by its cover. And they want an image that captures them as they're
And
fading through.
self-publishing, all publicity is up to you. And Ted and I are just lousy at publicity.
Yeah, sure.
We just, it was like I was saying, if I
You
had
have
to.
my card. That's what we're doing.
Well, so you're a good publicist.
I
I
thought I
had
was
to.
going to enjoy doing that part, but
No, I would rather sell no books than have to get out and, you know, like John Grisham, they said he put all his books in the back of his car and drove, I would rather never sell any.
He did his first book, Vanity Publishing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's hard, isn't it?
Oh,
Really
yeah,
hard.
It is. Well, and also if you're kind of a shy-ish person and you're not a bragging person, it's really hard to push yourself because it's just
You don't
embarrassing.
want to buy my book, do you?
See, that's what I would do.
and so when we self-publish this last one of the things you have to do is decide how many hard copies are you going to print. And they get a lot cheaper as you print more of them. But if you have 2,000 of them and they can't sell and they end up in your house, that's just not what you want.
Yeah,
You
and
get an
then-
entire room full of books.
And then my latest one, it's not like any of these, it's a fantasy, because I love fantasy too. And my agent had a publisher that was wanting it and was going to send me all the changes. And then suddenly they said, oh, we decided we don't want it after all. And so, you know, it's stuff like that. It's so disappointing. You get where you just don't feel like messing with it. And I tell myself, you know, my grandchildren love me anyway.
You know what I find interesting is Liliana Hart. She made New York and USA Today bestseller list as a self-published author, but Leah isn't as out there. But she had to make herself be out there, and she created a whole persona in order for her to write her books, and then ended up marrying the chief of police from the town where I'm at, because she had to, she networked with him in order to develop the law officers in her book. They ended up getting married.
Well, it takes tons of work, it takes tons of talent, and it takes wanting to do it, and it takes luck. And you have no control over luck. When the Twilight books came out, they're okay books and everything, but somehow
They got better as
they took off. They somehow hit the market just at the exact moment that they needed to. And so if you're going to try to be published, write because you love to write, not because you think you're going to be on the New York Times bestseller list.
It's not a question, but I was just going to tell you how I got introduced to your work. Mirk and the Mirk and Midnight Hour was in Ingram's advance thing, and I looked and I saw, oh, this author's from Mississippi, or it's got Mississippi ties and all that. So I got here, and the girl who was working here at the time read it and said, it's a great book. So, and then I looked and I saw that you were in Canada at the time, so I'm like, well, darn, should be great to have you. And so then I looked later, and you were appearing somewhere at one of the libraries, and I said, oh, there must be back. So
Lo and behold, we're back in Aberdeen.
we're glad to have you, certainly.
Well, thank you so much.
But yeah, that's probably the biggest in my eyes, and might or might not agree with me as far as publishing with a big agency or a big publishing company versus self-publishing is that machine pushing it otherwise.
Well, and if you get, like for Mirk and Midnight Hour, my publicist, right when it came out, was switching companies. And so, to me, they didn't do what they could have done for it.
And they were losing interest already.
Yeah.
They pushed brands
They did push
pretty good.
Strands really good. In fact, and we were showing before most of you came, Strands was published in Korean and in German and in Italian.
Oh, wow.
So they really were pushing Strands. But you're just kind of at their mercy, whatever they're going to do. And same with the covers. You have no say about the covers they put on them at all. A lot of people.
Well, they let
wonder
you
about
say,
it.
but they don't care what
Well,
you say.
Like this one, the Mirk and Midnight Hour. I complained about it because I said, the original one, you could see right through her dress, and it was like this sleeveless thing. And I said, is she walking through the wood in her underwear?
In the 1800s.
And
They
they,
didn't have clothes.
anyway, they made it a little bit more solid, but it did bother me, but it didn't matter that it bothered me. They did what they wanted to do.
They paid for it. They own it.
Yeah, they can do whatever
Are
they
you a
want.
member of any professional things like SCBWI or anything?
I was,
Okay.
but then I let my
Did you
membership
find
lapse.
it advantageous at all, or
No.
not really?
We'd love to have you in the Bar Writers Association with the last book.
Well, and,
We do a lot of networking, and
I know. There's so many things. It's like I say, it's just I don't feel like working anymore.
we do a school, or we do a big workshop every year at the awards conference.
Well, and people have told me to go to Comic-Cons and stuff like that because people are selling their books there. But again, I just don't want to.
Do you still write for enjoyment for yourself,
Oh
though?
yes, I do. Well, and I've got one I'm in the middle of. I'm just really slow. I'm doing the one I'm doing now is a retelling of The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. So I'm working on that now, but yeah.
Now, how does that work when you read tales as far as copyright and that kind
Well,
of
these
stuff?
old things, you can do whatever you want with them.
Because
There's no
there's
copyright on them.
Public,
Yeah.
don't
Right. If you're trying to do something newer, you'd have to be careful. But
You keep a file on your computer of like you'll see something you wanna chime in your 2 cents, and you keep that, and that's just your file. Like that's not something you're gonna publish.
Oh, I've got files both on the computer and not on of, good lines of dialogue I heard somebody say, and, just, a million ideas for different stories, and just.
I come home from work one day and said, I had to go to the lab and had to fight with the lab technician there today, and she's an old lady there. Her name is Ruby Jewel, and Jane's like, ooh, Ruby Jewel. Write that down. Somebody somewhere is going to show up with that name.
Well, actually, she does. I think in Mirk and Midnight
Oh,
Hour, there's
okay.
a Miss
I didn't know
Ruby
that.
Jewel.
Sadly, I've not read.
Yeah, Ted has never read any of my books.
However, when one's being released, I do the Facebook and I ghost tweet. They think it's her, and I'm tweeting out.
Because I
things about
refuse to
book.
get on Twitter, so.
So I tweet things as her,
Instagram.
and nobody knows. I can channel after 38 years together. I can channel her.
Every once in a while he misspells something though, and then I'm embarrassed. But
Yeah.
they think it's me.
Are these
What's-
classified as young adult?
They're classified as young adult, but what is it that you called?
New adult.
There's something new called new adult. When I was writing these, they called them crossovers, which adults like them too.
They have a young protagonist, but they're
And it's
really
my
more adult.
fans, all my biggest fans are actually grown-ups. They're not teenagers.
Because you like Hunger Games would be considered new adult.
Yeah.
Because she's 17, 18 years old and she's doing, you know.
Well, I'll have to
Just like
remember
her.
that that's what that's
What I
called.
was thinking is you're going to have to like social media.
What's the process to
Yeah.
put it on
or
CD?
something.
Somebody.
What's that?
To put them on CDs, you know, books on.
Oh, yeah, we've
Is
got, the first two are on, you can get them on
Audible.
audiobooks.
Yeah, and those are very interesting because they weren't just read; they were acted and directed. Random House, did all that, decided they wanted.
Well,
to
they
put
had
out.
someone who spoke French so that she could do the French passages of Monsieur de Cressac with a good accent and all that.
So I mean, it's,
They did it beautifully.
it's not like acted different lines. It's they choose an actor to read them though, and then the actor does the different
What's
things,
all
like
voices?
somebody reading, like a parent reading a
I
story.
love them. I probably have taken out as many as, I don't know how many CDs.
Well, if you
on
get
that.
one in the library, then she
The
can.
past 10 years, probably at least 500.
Well,
Because I'm the type of person, I guess, if I was a kid, they would say I had ADHD because I can't stay in one spot, so I carry my little player from room to room with me.
Yeah.
get-
And
Housework,
listen,
I do too.
and do housework and do, you know,
You can beg your librarian to buy.
oh,
My
we
books.
don't, yeah, he
I'll buy
knows.
your books.
And she gave me that look. So. The only problem with audiobooks is keeping them in print. Sometimes I don't make very many copies of them, so we may or may not be able to find them. If there's some left,
Okay. I think you can get it on audible.com still, both of them, but if you want the CD, which is I think what you want, I expect you can still get them.
If I start a book,
They will run out.
I bought a couple through authors that were here, I start a book and then, unless I'm teaching a class where I don't have to participate, that's the only time I get to sit in the classroom and read it. I'm not an artist, so when I had art the other day, they all had something to do and I was just reading.
Well, if there's no other questions, even though I'm a terrible salesman, I do have books for sale. They're $10 each. I only brought paperbacks, I didn't bring hardcovers.
I want the ghost one.
And I actually suggested her not to sell books at all because if she sells too many, there's some tax complications. But you can go online and buy them all. So go online, go to Amazon, go to Barnes and Noble,
I'll listen
go to her
before you-
website, jane-nickerson.com. And her website's cool because she's put a lot of stuff in it, like what's that?
The
Underwear
corset
controversy. There we go. The corset controversy, which apparently was some big deal at one time about
Yeah,
how bad it was to wear
Lots
these.
of people believed you should. Okay, now do you
And
want
so
me to
she's got,
sign
she
it, please?
researched and she
Let me
had
go sit
articles
here.
from magazines
Hold on.
at the time.
Go sit over
She's
there.
got a lot of stock. She likes the clothes and there's a lot of pictures of
There's
clothing
two
at
things
the
I want
time.
to do. One would be after your
There's
speaking.
study
If you have
questions for
time.
book clubs that want to do this. And she hasn't done this in a long time, but we used to advertise that she would Skype to, if you would read her book as a book club, she would Skype into your book club when you met.
Oh, that's cool. That'd be cool, yeah.
And she's done it several times. She hasn't done it in a long time, but I assume she'd still do so. But,
With a little pride.
That's friends.
Will you let me
and so she would, and so she's just on the TV there.
But it's up
People are
there.
sitting around discussing the book that they've read.
I Yeah, here's my.
That's a cool idea.
Never had one.
Well-
Strands rhymes go, that doesn't have any ghost in it, does
No,
it?
no.
I don't like ghosts. I don't believe in them.
And if you give me permission, I'd like to take a picture of the cover and use it in the October issue of my magazine.
You can also go to our website where there's images that are easy to clip off if you like.
Does,
That's easier than a photograph.
I have a horror literary magazine called Blood Rain.
And if you ever want images like that, when they published them, they sent us really high-res images for her to look at and comment on and then ignore. So I still have those. I still have those images and different things.
My benefit of publishing with a small press was if I didn't like it, they wouldn't, they weren't going to use it. But now you understand why I asked you to beta read as a lifelong Mississippi resident.
Right.
I come from a very liberal location.
All right. Well, I'm
No
gonna
internet.
close out the video. I can
If you go down to the bottom, there's Wi-Fi.
Doug,
Thank you. No.
I was just going to show her website. You can find
I
it.
have two-
Jane-Nickerson.com.
The first thing is
Block these.
Well,
I'm trying to do it.
thank you, Jane. And your husband for being here. Thank you all for being here.
They're all busy, they're not listening to you.
That's okay.